We've all heard horror stories about insurance randomly deciding to not cover medications or prices skyrocketing out of nowhere. But driving all those decisions is a secret team of middlemen and a massive legalized bribery scheme.
It's a modern form of barely legal gangsterism.
They're called pharmacy benefit managers, and they're hired by your insurance company to handle all things medication. They negotiate drug prices with pharma companies. They set your copay at the pharmacy. They even determine what drugs your insurance covers. At the heart of this story is something simple: a rebate. You're probably familiar with the kinds of rebates you get as a customer. If you buy this Oral-B electric toothbrush, you can get a partial refund by sending in a form to prove your purchase. It's like a little reward from Oral-B for choosing their toothbrush over, say, a Philips Sonicare toothbrush. Pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, get hired by your insurance company to get those kinds of rebates on a massive scale. We're talking a lot more than $25 back on a toothbrush.
And then they pass those savings down to patients? Oh God, no. Ugh.
That's right. Insurance companies and PBMs work together to get rebate after rebate on the drugs you purchase. But you would never know by looking at your astronomical copays and premiums. Instead, PBMs and insurance companies use those rebates to pad shareholder profits. You might be wondering, why do these rebates even exist in the first place? What do pharmaceutical companies get from dishing these out? The answer lies in one powerful list, known as a formulary.
So because the PBM gets to decide which drugs are covered and which ones aren't, PBMs essentially develop what we call a formulary. Think of it as when you walk into a restaurant and there's a particular menu that will tell you which foods you can buy at that restaurant. It's very similar, except that the PBM is operating with medicines, and they're ultimately determining which manufacturer's drugs will be covered and to which degree they'll be covered. So they're essentially creating a system of preference, saying, look, we're going to cover this drug, we're not going to cover this drug, we're going to prefer this drug among the drugs we cover.
Pharmaceutical companies want their drugs to be covered by your insurance. If Pfizer's blood pressure medication isn't on your insurance's formulary, that medication won't be covered. And if it's not covered, you're not going to buy it. Instead, you'll just ask your doctor for an option that's covered, aka a drug that's on the formulary. And that's why it makes more sense to call these rebates what they actually are: bribes, or kickbacks. PBMs get kicked back a portion of the profit of each drug they add to the formulary that we, the unknowing consumer, buy at the pharmacy.
What it means is that PBMs can really push manufacturers to give bigger and bigger kickbacks in exchange for that preferential treatment. The manufacturer essentially buys its way onto the formulary and by extension buys its way into our bodies.
Just to ground us a bit, pharmacists can't get paid by drug makers to hawk some medicines over others. They can't pop into the local Pfizer office and say, I'll dispense your stuff over the competition if you make it worth my while. That's a kickback. It's very illegal and unethical. We checked with independent pharmacist Nate Hux, just in case.
I've never had the opportunity to take a kickback. That was all outlawed way before I became a pharmacist.
But thanks to a legal loophole from the 90s, kickbacks are the bread and butter of the PBM industry.
In 1987, Ronald Reagan signed federal anti-kickback laws. They were really centered around trying to get at organized crime and looking at how kickbacks distorted marketplaces and ultimately harmed competition and the consumer experience.
By the 1990s, lobbying groups had successfully convinced lawmakers to create exemptions from these kickback statutes, one of which was for pharmacy benefit managers. That decision opened the floodgates for PBMs to become just as corrupt as the drug companies they're supposed to be negotiating with. But the story doesn't stop there. Because of these kickbacks, PBMs have created a bizarre marketplace where not only are they pocketing rebates that could be passed off to you, they're often making you pay more than what the drugs actually cost. Nowhere is this more clear than with insulin.
Insurance companies send explanation of benefits out to consumers. They will show the price that was billed from a pharmacy to their PBM. But what a lot of people don't understand is in those explanation of benefits, those prices really aren't real.
A vial of insulin could be hundreds of dollars for a patient, but according to public filings and investigations from the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, we know now that the actual cost of insulin, the actual amount that drug manufacturers bring in, is closer to around $35 to $50 per vial of insulin.
In the case of insulin, the problem wasn't just that consumers were paying fake, bloated prices invented by PBMs. PBMs were creating a situation where pharma companies had to keep raising their prices to do business with the major PBMs.
So the rebate system creates these perverse incentives where, because drug manufacturers don't have a really compelling interest to actually lower their prices to gain market share, instead what they do is increase their prices to create more bandwidth for bigger rebates, which is what their main customer, the PBM, ultimately craves.
In other words, if I make insulin, I can incentivize PBMs to cover my insulin and put it on the formulary over others by offering a bigger rebate. But that rebate won't cut into my own profit margin, because I'll just raise the price of my insulin at large and let the PBM pocket that increase as a rebate. But of course, every pharma company has this idea. So when one company raises the price to create a bigger rebate, so do all of their competitors. And what ensues is a race to offer PBMs the biggest bribe to land on the formulary. There's even cases where you can't buy a cheaper generic and have it covered because the expensive brand name is offering a bigger bribe.
In the inhaler market, there's a drug called Symbicort. It's a brand drug that basically costs $150 more than the generic version of the inhaler would cost. But because it comes with a larger rebate, we see that it gets exclusive formulary coverage compared to the generic.
PBMs have made it deliberately impossible to know what kind of rebates they're actually getting and what your insurance company is ultimately paying for drugs. Aside from the occasional testimony or investigation about insulin or EpiPens, lawmakers, journalists, consumers, none of them know the real price of drugs. And that's by design. In 2018, when Ohio's then state auditor Dave Yost tried getting information on drug pricing in regards to Medicaid, he was told it was a trade secret. And if you thought you might be able to wink at your pharmacist and tell them that you know that insulin is actually way cheaper, you're out of luck.
So there are clauses in each pharmacy benefits manager's contract that says you need to charge the contracted price. You're also not allowed to ever offer anybody a better price than the price you're billing for.
It's not just consumers that PBMs are robbing. They're also driving independent pharmacists out of business. And that's due to the vertical integration of this whole industry. Companies like United Healthcare and CVS have their own PBMs and pharmacies. CVS's PBM will cut CVS pharmacies a better deal on a drug than it would give its competitors, such as independent pharmacists like Nate. Nate said there's many drugs he can't dispense because PBMs and insurance companies reimburse him below what he's paying to obtain the drug for his customers, meaning he'd lose money every time he dispenses them. But that's not even the worst way pharmacists get squeezed by PBMs.
So one of the expenses that we do deal with, insurance billing, is many times they will audit us on claims that are years old, and they're going to say, well, we paid you $1,000, we're going to take that $1,000 back.
What we saw was that these insignificant typographical errors, a typo on a physician name as an example, the PBM would come back and claw back every dollar from that claim, not just the pharmacist's dispensing fee, but the entire cost of the drug itself.
Nate has found a unique way to get around the scheme and charge people less than is contractually obligated by the PBMs. He opened a pharmacy that takes no insurance because it focuses on dispensing generic versions of drugs. He estimates that 85% of all the drugs he dispenses are cheaper at Freedom Pharmacy as compared to traditional pharmacies with contracted PBMs.
Talking a couple dollars for a 90-day supply.
That other 15%, those are the brand name drugs, and he still dispenses those at his other pharmacy, Pickerington.
At Pickerington Pharmacy, the prices are much higher because we have to do business with insurance companies.
Independent pharmacies like Nate's won't solve the PBM problem. However, PBMs have recently come under increased scrutiny from both Democrats and Republicans. The FTC is actively investigating the role of PBMs in inflating drug prices. The three largest PBMs have a near monopoly, controlling around 89% of the market. And in the midst of that investigation, Ohio's now Attorney General, Republican Dave Yost, has announced his own action.
This morning, Ohio's Attorney General is putting Cigna, Humana, and Prime Therapeutics on notice, alleging a conspiracy to keep drug prices unreasonably high.
Yost's antitrust suit claims Express Scripts and other PBMs created a pay-to-play rebate system that pushes manufacturers to increase drug prices. Yost is also going after PBMs for clawing back millions of dollars from independent pharmacists. PBMs claim to save consumers money by negotiating rebates with pharma companies, a claim Yost in his suit calls knowingly false. Instead, Yost argues they're scheming in the shadows to control drug prices on all sides of the market. And when they came under scrutiny, they moved part of the operation to Switzerland to keep pocketing rebates. PBMs need to be held to the same standard as other industries under federal anti-kickback laws. They shouldn't be able to influence any medical decision based on how much of a kickback they receive. It won't fix the entire drug industry, but it's a good start. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you'd like to see more stories like this one, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to get more Perfect Union in your feed. And if you have any ideas for stories that you would like for us to investigate, just drop them in the comments below.